Look, she's on her head. We're on Facebook Live. So excellent. I want to thank everyone who's joining in, coming in now, whether you're joining us through a Zoom link or you're watching on Facebook Live. I am Brad Bumgardner. I'm the executive director for your Indiana Audubon, and this is our Hoosier Birders Hour. So it's a chance that we've had for this last year to kind of meet up once a month, get online here during the lunch hour on a Friday and talk any kind of topic about bird questions you guys have. We've invited folks to always submit questions, or if you have them, you want to bring them specifically to the meeting or into the chat or into the Facebook comments. We love kind of answering any questions about anything about birds, about Indiana bird conservation, some of the programs that we have going on. There's just a growing number of activities, events, programs, and just what I call cool stories and spark moments that are just too much to share. We have weekly e-blasts, we have the Cardinal, we have the Facebook posts, there's our website, but I'm always hearing from somebody that says, I had no idea you were doing this. And the best example is I was at our Project Owlnet last weekend. We had our kickoff for that and at the Indiana Dunes State Park. And this is year 16 that we've been studying saw-whet owls. And there was a couple from Portage, Indiana, a mere 15 minutes from the site. This is so cool. We've never heard of this. This is our first time here being able to experience this. It's like, where you been? We've been out here for 16 years, 700 owls, and we've been, sharing this knowledge in the community. And so there's just always new connections and new ways and new programs that are going on. So this is another example of ways that we can share that and our connections with all birds and specific birds. Before we get started, and I introduce the two folks that you're looking at here with me, a couple other updates I want to provide because there's so much going on, and one of them is just mentioned Project Owlnet. And so if you're interested in exploring that magic migration of saw-whet owl that are coming through right now, whether at the Indiana Dunes or at our Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary, look at this. This is pictures from just last night. So little tiny saw-whet owls, so the size of a robin. They're migrating right now. They caught like 5 the other night up in the dunes. They're at like 15 already in the first week. So this is an opportunity if you want to see the smallest owl in Indiana, learn about the research that goes on into looking at the migration patterns of these birds, as well as support it, whether you want to adopt a bird or support Project Owlnet in other ways, volunteering. You can learn all about that. We just gave you the link there in the comments, our indianaaudubon.org, the events page. You can sign up for any of our, whether the behind the scenes nights or our saw-whet and s'mores. And so you're guaranteed one of the two on any given night. And so we always can't guarantee the owls, but we can guarantee s'mores will be out there and we'll have some campfires and you can learn all about that amazing research program. We were also talking this week about chasing melody. And so, of course, you heard about it all summer long, tagging wood thrushes across their migration path. And now the results are actually coming in. And we did a quick little video earlier this week. I want to share my screen really quick and just show you that again, what we were looking at with our wood thrushes. And so I'm pulling up just a quick tracking map of several wood thrushes. We're actually looking at thrushes from Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. Ours are yellow. And so there was a magic date right about September 26th or so where our wood thrushes started moving. And so if I hit play here and just go through just a course of a couple of days, looks like I need to zoom out because they're going even farther. And all they're already here. So this is just through the 18th of October. You back up a little bit there, you can see these tracks. And so we have our wood thrushes are going through national wildlife refuges. There's one big one right over here in eastern Mississippi. There's some other national forest land up here in Georgia that they're moving through. And then our birds are passing through Texas right now. And check this track out. If I continue, push and play there, boom, that is in Veracruz, Mexico. And so we have 2 birds that have already arrived there. And so it's just amazing to see the early results that we're getting from this great research project. And for those that have adopted a bird, you're able to track that online and you'll be able to see the different notifications on different days on when the birds have passed different towers in their migration. So really cool, merging that technology with this new science to be able to continue to learn about birds. And, I was just on Birdcast too, and here's the sad news. It's almost Halloween, guys. Migration is almost done. We got, looks like 85% of our birds have migrated, according to Birdcast for Indiana. 509 million birds and 355,000 have completed of their 600 million that are estimated to go through Indiana. And see, we're getting down to the last few birds, owls, sparrows, cranes that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And but it is winding down, but there's still a lot of great activities, things that you can do with us. And one other thing, though, before we get started, is I want to give a little shout out to one of our board of director members, Jenny Habecker. She just sent me an article from the New York Times that is so cool. I just wanted to share today also. And they're studying, just like we're doing with the Modus towers, is they are tracking plovers in the Netherlands. And in the last year, they've been tracking these. They're called gray plovers. And they put these little transmitters on them. And they're able to track their speed and their altitude and what they're doing. And one of them, as it's migrating last spring, was heading through the Netherlands, and it suddenly veered course and plummeted down into Sweden into a quarry mine. And the tag disappeared down in the bottom of this mine, and they were able to retrieve it. They got the data from it, and they just documented the world's highest altitude bird murder predation event. And a peregrine falcon took out a gray plover at 10,000 feet and brought it down to its nest and killed it, and obviously probably fed it to its young. And so just we're looking at the perils of migration, and birds are flying high to avoid these sort of things. But even at 10,000 feet, when you think you got nothing around, you got to watch out for a peregrine falcon. And that's just a cool bird that we have right here in Indiana. So just such a cool story I read. If you get on the New York Times, it's called A Feathery Murder at 10,000 Feet. It's just a really cool story. You may have to have a login to be able to access it, but I was able to read the article, and just so much that we're learning through the science here. And it all relates back here to Indiana. And so it's a bird that, the DNR, the non-game program, has successfully been bringing back here in the state. And I even remember as a kid, locating an early Sandhill Crane nest up in Northeast Indiana. And this was not a thing that we had a lot of back in the 80s. And it's hard to believe that this was a bird that was completely extirpated from nesting. And it kind of brought it back home. And I had a phone call once as a naturalist at Dune State Park. And there was this lady, she was calling in April, and she had just moved from New York State. And she was in Indianapolis, and it's about 10, 11 a.m. on a series of south wind mornings in early April, and she just hears this crazy sound. And she's looking, she's craning her eyes, trying to find them, and she can't find that sound. She's like, what is that sound? And I realized it's such a notable sound for us in Indiana. You hear sandhill cranes migrating in the spring, you instantly know what it is. And because we're in such a special flyaway, that we have a special chance to experience them right here in Indiana. And so just kind of the chat about cranes today and why they're so special in Indiana. Got Nick Echterling, who is the property manager at Jasper-Pulaski Fish Wildlife Area. And tell us a little bit about your role, what you do there, how long you've been there, and obviously you probably see cranes quite a bit.
Yeah. So I've been at Jasper-Pulaski for a little over 4 years now. I started in 2020. I've been property manager for the state of Indiana for 10 years. Like Brad said, we get a lot of cranes. Our property has more sandhills through here than any other property in Indiana. One of the best places to view cranes east of the Mississippi. And we've started our weekly crane counts. We had 3,000 cranes this past week, and our peak number at the end of November, we're hoping should be around 30,000.
So we're looking at the sandhill crane species, which we have different populations. This is kind of eastern one. I also have Sam Urquidez. You're with the International Crane Foundation, and is one of the outreach specialists. You do actually a lot of work right here in Indiana. And tell us kind of what your role is and kind of how you're involved with cranes.
Yeah, so I'm the only ICF staff in the state of Indiana, so anything cranes is my business. I work with the Sandhill cranes, I work with the whooping cranes. I'm volunteer coordinator, so if anyone's looking for volunteer hours, please hit me up. And then I monitor the whooping cranes that spend the winter here in Indiana.
I remember just as a kid going to Jasper-Pulaski to see these cranes. There's just such a connection there, that big charismatic megafauna that people really kind of connect to. And And I think, when I was looking at a list of all the different kinds of cranes, if I want to go on a crane big day in Indiana, it's going to be a short task. There's not very many you're going to find compared to sparrows and warblers. And Sam, I think, the International Crane Foundation exists, here in the Midwest, and there's a reason international, because it is such a small group of just a finite number of cranes. And one of the things that I've learned is just from the International Crane Foundation is that every crane has a story in it. And so can you speak to a little bit about, cranes overall in the world and kind of how we've connected with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 15 crane species worldwide, and the International Crane Foundation works with all of them. Unfortunately, 10 of our crane species are endangered. Thankfully, the sandhill cranes are not one of them, but the other crane species we can see here in Indiana, the whooping crane, is. And that's just due to habitat loss. Unregulated hunting in the early 1900s really dropped their numbers, and we've been always trying to bounce back from that. But worldwide, people have been able to connect with cranes. Many cultures, we see indigenous people here in North America, in Aborigines, in Australia, all over the world, people have connected with cranes since the beginning of time. So they're a really cool bird. They're a giant bird, so people can really connect with them. They mate for life, and they also dance with their partners to strengthen that pair bond. So a very charismatic bird that a lot of people can connect with.
It's so remarkable that there's so many that are in some sort of vulnerable state, endangered state. I see critically state. What would you say is the kind of the crane species in the world that we have that's like the most critical?
I think right now the most critical is the Siberian crane, I believe, and they're located in Russia. They did drop pretty drastically. I know our founder at ICF, George Archibald, went over to Russia during the Cold War, actually, to work with a professor there to kind of bring back the Siberian crane. Their habitat has been really restricted, especially their flyway. They used to go all the way to Iran for the winter, and now there's only one crane that makes it all the way to Iran now.
And on the opposite end, what would we say is probably the one of least concern, or the most with the highest population?
I think those would be our Eurasian cranes, and then also the sandhill cranes that we have here in Indiana. We really consider them a conservation success story. The sandhill cranes, they've really been able to bounce back from low numbers in the 1900s. They just have been so adaptable to this human-dominated landscapes that they've really been able to come back, which is really great to see.
We have a real juxtaposition in Indiana of having one of the most abundant crane species with also one of the rarest crane species. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So here in Indiana, we get to see both crane species that we have here in North America, which is really exciting. The sandhill cranes we like to consider all of our cranes just based on their beak size, how wetland dependent they are. So whooping cranes have a much longer beak than our sandhill cranes. And because of that, our whooping cranes are a lot more wetland dependent. So habitat loss hits them a lot harder. And they've also really struggled being able to come back from the drastic number loss that they had in the early 1900s. In the 1930s, we were down to 20 individual whooping cranes in the world. And so they've always been trying to bounce back from that. And so that's been a real struggle. Compared to the sandhill cranes, they did drop numbers. Like you mentioned, they were completely extirpated from this area, from states like Indiana, Ohio, Iowa. We didn't have any cranes. And so because of that, they've been able to bounce back. Just because their numbers were a little bit higher other places in the country, they've been able to move back into this area a little bit more easily than the whooping cranes.
You you just caught me with a kind of a stat or a fact that I didn't know. So there's a correlation with the crane species on the length of the bill and then their dependency on the wetland habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if these short, like I'm looking at like the black crown crane and such, so
Yes.
what would the habitat be versus a wetland then for these cranes?
So the gray-crowned cranes and then the black-crowned cranes are indigenous to South Africa, the South African area. And I can't speak too much on these birds since I'm not as familiar with them as I am on the whooping crane and the sandhill cranes, but I do believe they utilize the savanna a lot more readily than the wetlands.
Interesting. Cool. And so here for Indiana, we have Sandhill cranes, the most popular one. And what is that population? Do we have an estimate?
In our flyway, I believe it's about 100,000, and then in all of North America, about 1 million is the last estimate.
1 million, about 10% are in the flyway, kind of east of the Mississippi that moves through here. And I believe ours are
Yes.
the bigger ones, right? We get the chunky cranes compared to
Yeah, we
the
have there's 6 subspecies of sandhill cranes. 3 are migratory. So we have the greater sandhill cranes that we have here in Indiana. We have the lesser sandhill cranes and the Canadian sandhill cranes, which are more on the West Coast. And then 3 of our population or our subspecies are non-migratory, and those would be the Cuban, the Mississippi, and the Florida.
in Florida, it seems like they're like tamer, like they're out in your yards a lot more.
Uh-huh.
But that's how I used to think. And then I'm seeing that as the population grows and we get more nesting, that I'm seeing nesting pairs like in our neighborhood now that like come
Mm-hmm.
out of the wetlands and they have their little colts around.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah,
didn't
they
seem always be a
definitely
lot
are
here.
very adapting to people and people-dominated landscapes and getting a lot more comfortable with that.
So it makes it so hard to believe that they were at one point rare, even for sandhill cranes in Indiana. And I have this
Mm-hmm.
other image, see if it pulls up. Yeah, we can kind of see that from this side, 1982, first nesting that was confirmed in the state, and that was at a chain of lakes. If you are up in Northeast Indiana, if you know where Pokagon State Park is, right next to Pokagon is now the Trine State Recreation Area. And that was part of an old church camp that has this chain of called the Little Gentian Lakes. And that's where they first recorded sandhill cranes nesting there in 1982. And this map there that we see is now several years old, but from some of the breeding bird atlas data, as we've seen them kind of fill in. And now we're down to a lot of other sites. And Nick, I think, do you have breeding at Jasper-Pulaski as well?
We do. Yeah, it's getting more and more common. We had at least 3 successfully hatched this year. I saw pairs of cranes with 3 different pairs with colts. But yeah, every year that I've been here, we've had nesting cranes, and I know they're becoming more common in the area. People around Valparaiso, I've heard of cranes in or around their yards with colts, and yeah, across the whole northern part of the state, nesting cranes are getting to be fairly common.
Mm-hmm. There's something significant about Jasper-Pulaski that we know, and as our crane numbers have been growing, we've seen that. And we were just talking beforehand. Is that I remember as a kid in the 1980s there was an Outdoor Indiana article, and it was the bucket list of the best things that every Hoosier should do. And obviously, Outdoor Indiana, it's going to be nature based. And one of the top ones on the list was visit the Sandhill Crane migration at Jasper-Pulaski. Why Jasper-Pulaski? Why not Kingsbury? Why not Willow Slough or any of the other properties that are up in that area too?
Yeah, I think just Jasper-Pulaski has been a holdover of really good crane habitat that happens to be right in their migratory path. I mean, really, the whole northwest part of the state is good, and as that population grows, they're hitting some other properties. But Jasper-Pulaski's always had the shallow wetlands that are important to cranes for roosting. So how they use our property, they come here in the fall. The cranes that are staging, they roost in our wetlands at night, and then generally most of them are flying out in the morning to go feed in agriculture fields, which there's plenty of ag around. So we have the important safe wetlands for roosting, and then we have all the food they can need as well. So those 2 things combined with geographical location has just really made JP shine for a crane staging area.
I kind of anthropomorphize that to us. So you're driving around, you're on vacation, there's an exit, there's a hotel accommodations, there's food, there's a McDonald's right here. It's kind of everything you need. And then there may be some like little social venues as well for the cranes. Since we were talking about them kind of dancing and such there. The uh the crane migration we've seen kind of spills out from the main breeding grounds, which tend to be the north. In fact, what would you define the breeding grounds, Sam, for sandhill cranes?
So most of our sandhill cranes will nest up in Wisconsin and Canada in the summers, and then come down, migrate down further south for the winters. But as their populations continue to increase, since they are so site specific for their nests, as the populations continue to grow, the best nesting habitat up north is being occupied. So they're finding other areas. So that's kind of why we're seeing them come down further into Indiana, is because there just are so many nesting pairs.
Expands out. What about the timing?
Yeah, so
Because
with climate, oh, sorry.
warblers and stuff, warblers and they're all gone. So what fixes kind of their timing for migration if we're wanting to see that?
For the sandhill cranes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so with climate change, I know you mentioned earlier about seeing them in October and about October being peak time. So with climate change, with temperatures shifting, our milder winters, we're seeing them migrate much later in the fall and then much earlier in the spring because just the temperatures are supporting them being able to head back further north at that time.
Yeah, I had pulled up our historic counts here, Jasper-Pulaski, earlier today, and in 1976, our peak count was 12,000 cranes, and that was on October 16th. And then that has steadily, one increased in number. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
our count last year was 30 something thousand, but also later. So October 16th, and that trended later and later, and now it's generally the last week of November. So it has shifted over a month later than it was in 1976. Yeah, 1976 when they started the count here.
So let's back up. What causes the big count? Is it just this is the peak of migration each year is coming through? Is there something that if I'm looking to come and I want to see it, the biggest count, I should just set that date?
Pretty much. It's somewhat weather dependent. If we could jump quite a bit from the second week in November to that third week if we have a big weather event. But they usually stick around for a week or two, it seems like. So if you show up the last week of November or the first week of December, pretty good guarantee you're going to see 20 to 30,000 cranes.
When you say weather event, is it just what do you mean by that?
It would be a big cold front. A couple years
Okay.
ago, I think it was when you guys had your event out here, had the Audubon folks. We had it was blowing north wind, snowy, and
Yeah.
just a lot of cranes had showed up in that week, and it was perfect timing. But yeah, something the marshes they're roosting on farther north of here would freeze, so below freezing temperatures north of Indiana, maybe a
Okay.
big wind
Drive
event,
them
some
in.
snow, and that's going to trigger them cranes that haven't migrated by the calendar to migrate now because the weather's bad. We got to get going south.
Interesting. Um, I found, let me share this. They had done some studies tracking, and maybe both have probably seen this as well, sandhill cranes, and they had different tags, and they were able to basically connect these pathways for them. And so you were kind of talking about is maybe Jasper-Pulaski isn't as unique. It just has the food and the habitat like other areas in that region. And so it definitely does look like that Jasper-Pulaski serves as a funneling point, especially in that fall. And it looks like we have birds that are coming down from both sides of the lake that almost like this is kind of a learned maybe behavior for that.
Yeah, I think it is, Brad, for sure. I mean, we've always had some cranes using the property, and those cranes continue to come back every year. And as the population grows, their offspring follow them, other cranes follow them. And yeah, it's a combination of a good geographical spot and a learned behavior from cranes that have been coming here for years.
Mhm. As I look at this fall, I see it looks like kind of a bend. So I think there's kind of a lake, and you got Horicon Marsh that's kind of up there in Wisconsin. But then I see that compared to the spring, I see it more in the fall. In the eastern end of the state, there seems to be kind of a flyway of birds, and it seems like the Pigeon River Fish and Wildlife Area seems to be also kind of getting a growing number. Have you heard anything about the numbers that are there in the eastern part of the state?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on how much they're getting in the fall. The big property in the state that usually comes up again for sandhills is Goose Pond, but I think they're a little stronger in like late winter, early spring, that return migration, which would be
Mhm.
in southern Indiana.
And Sam, have you been down there yet in the fall or in the winter time to see the cranes at Goose Pond?
Yes, yes, I have. I was actually down there last week, but just supporting what Nick said, and we see a lot more at Goose Pond in the spring as they're coming up from further south.
In fact, if you look at the spring, it looks like there's almost like a thicker blue line from Goose Pond in the southwest part of the state. And it's probably just kind of these staging grounds, like Goose Pond. And then uh, I've also noticed in the spring, and it looks like it shows this in this map, that spring it's a little wider. And I notice it in the spring a lot of times that where they're at is a lot more dispersed, where we're flooding, where the local conditions allow for. So areas like all along the Kankakee River can host a lot more cranes than you might actually see at Jasper-Pulaski. Is that something that I think I'm seeing, or can you verify that, Nick?
We don't do counts in the spring, so I guess I can't back it up with hard data, but just driving around and being here, I would agree with you 100%, Brad. We get our big numbers in the fall, and then in the spring, they definitely seem to be more spread out across Northwest Indiana. And they move through the property a lot quicker too. In the fall, they seem to stick around for a week or two, and our numbers build. In the spring, they're here for a day or two. It seems like, and they're pushing faster north. But I think part of that, like you mentioned, if the Kankakee River happens to be flooded in the spring, there's more water on the landscape, better habitat, seasonally flooded fields and low spots if we have heavy rain. So they're just spread out a little more as the habitat's more available.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned they're in a big hurry. In the spring, yeah, it's very, weather condition based. And as soon as you get that condition, that New York lady that was calling me, she was in those conditions. And I remember it was like early April, and I'm thinking that doesn't happen anymore too. And now it's as early as that weather breaks. And as soon as that ice starts to melt, then by late February, March, you're starting to hear them calling as they're migrating overhead, and it's just such a effortless migration to see them. And when those conditions allow, I think just like in the fall where you get 30,000 that come through, they can pile up and you get big counts in the spring. You're not doing Jasper-Pulaski, but I do know that they count at the Indiana Dunes. And they have that longshore bird tower right there in that southern tip at Indiana Dunes State Park. And this spring, I recall we broke the single day state record for total cranes counted in one day, and it was 40,000 that were seen. And this was all 40,000 in the air that were flying by. Obviously, they're using those thermals, so they hit Lake Michigan and they kind of turn left or right. And so you kind of count these thermal groups as each one passes by. They're going around Chicago or the other way around. And so it's really easy to get an accurate count. And they got little clickers. I'm sure clickers are smoking by the end of that day. That. And you guys count in the fall. And everybody asks me is, how do you count them in the field? Because they're moving around.
Yeah, so we actually count them in the air because, like you said, it's almost easier to count them while they're flying than it is to count 30,000 cranes sitting on the ground in one spot. But yeah, we count every Tuesday, starting in October to the end of December. And how we do it is we have 5 employees here at Jasper-Pulaski, and we go out before sunrise, and we have 5 designated locations around the property. So we space everybody out far enough that we're all counting different cranes as they leave the roost. So we get in our spots.
You're counting them as they leave?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Go out early in the morning, and as the cranes start to leave, we count. Pretty much now, you're counting individual cranes. By the end of November, we're estimating. When you have thousands of cranes coming by, you don't have enough time to count individuals. But yeah, we count the birds as they're leaving from the roost to go feed in agriculture fields. And then as the morning goes on, we usually sit there for about an hour, and then we have one person drive through the marsh to count any of the cranes that haven't flown out or to flush the last few birds off the roost. But yeah, it works pretty good that way. We catch, I think we're catching most of them, and yeah, yep.
So it seems like even though they're over such a large area, they're roosting in a pretty restricted set of wetlands. And so they're all doing that socially. They're doing it for protection.
A little
Or is
both.
the habitat that good there?
Yeah, probably all 3. But yeah, we have about 1,000 acres in the center of the property. That's our designated waterfowl resting area. There's limited access to it, and that's to keep the cranes undisturbed while they're coming into roost in the evening. So they can come in there, roost, nobody's bothering them, and fly out in the morning on their own.
Mm-hmm. So if you want to go see the cranes and you've never been there, what should, I guess, you expect? What are you going to see? What should you bring? Is there going to be a gate? Do you have to pay a fee? So what are the details for first timers going to Jasper-Pulaski this season?
Pretty easy. No fee, nothing like that. No gate, no fee. Um, if you look us up on Google, should have Jasper-Pulaski Fish Wildlife Area pinned at the office, and then also should have the Jasper-Pulaski Sandhill Crane Observation Area, which is 1/4 mile west of the office. We have a large parking lot. Folks can park there. In good view of the parking lot is part of the refuge, and we have 500 acres there that's completely off limits to hunters, bird watchers, everybody. The parking lot and the observation tower is at the edge of that refuge. So you can park at the parking lot. We have a small paved trail with some crane questions leading up to the tower. And actually, for anybody that hasn't been there, Brad's background is the crane observation tower.
Yeah, there you go, right there.
It's stairs and wheelchair accessible. There's a ramp and 2 sets of stairs. Part of the tower is covered. We do have 3 scopes and a set of binoculars up there. They're not coin operated or anything. They're just available for use. We still recommend folks bring their own optics because, as you can see in Brad's picture as well, in the evenings in November and December, that tower is going to be packed, especially on weekends. Be shoulder to shoulder. So you can, if you're planning on coming during peak migration, which we mentioned is usually towards the end of November, that's what the tower is going to look like at sunset. Going to be a lot of folks, going to be fairly busy, but you're going to see a lot of cranes. Mm-hmm. We also recommend coming in the morning too. So the 2 best times are sunrise and sunset. If you want to avoid crowds, definitely come out in the morning. Get here little before sunrise while it's just starting to get light. And you're going to see basically the same thing you're going to see in the afternoon, except the cranes are going to be flying out. You might not have as many birds land in front of the tower on the ground, but you're going to see plenty of birds in the air still. What they tend to do in the evening, they're flying back into the roost. We maintain that large open field in front of the tower, and the cranes seem to congregate there in the evening. A lot of them will land in the field before they go to roost and kind of socialize, feed a little bit more, and then go to the wetlands. But yeah, it's definitely a unique place to come view that many large birds in one spot.
Yeah. Sam, what would you bring as your first timer? What's your recommendations?
I definitely recommend bringing your own optics because, like Nick said, it gets super busy, and sometimes people's optics are better than the ones that are there. We always recommend leaving about 2 football fields in between you and the cranes so you don't disturb them. Obviously, the tower's a little elevated, so sometimes they will get a little bit closer, but you definitely need some optics to get really good eyes on those birds.
Yeah, definitely a good point that, throughout the state, you can drive around and see cranes at different properties, and none are going to have this kind of tower like this. And so I find that when they're really busy nights and they're filling in, they get really close, and you're not going to get that. If you're driving around and jumping out of your car at a fish and wildlife area, you just can't get that close. And I remember, I did pull up this picture that we got of the tower, and to the, I guess it would be my right on this image, is the original tower, which is covered, and it's just a small little structure. And then you guys have built on in the last, couple decades and added this big long extension, and it's an amazing ADA accessible deck as well. And so it's if you go right this week is Birdability Week, right? And so it's on the National Audubon's Birdability site, on a site that really anybody can get to. My tip, I think optics is a good one. There are a couple of those viewers, but I think having your own binoculars is bundle up. You never expect kind of how cold it gets out there. And obviously the colder the weather, the more cranes are going to get. That's what's, we just talked about, is pushing them down as those wetlands freeze up north. And so there's no trees alongside there. You don't want trees. You want to be able to see, and so you are pretty exposed out there to some of the elements. And so everything from the little heating pads to the winter coats in November definitely is kind of my biggest thing that I've learned is don't go there and get cold, because you're going to be there oftentimes standing for a couple hours watching them, and it's that stationary birding. You're not really keeping that warm as much. If you go out there and you are going to see Sam out there, right? You guys host some nights.
Yeah. So I'll be at JP at the tower basically every Saturday evening from 3 to 6 for this foreseeable future.
So 3 to 6. So you're out there in the evening hours as folks are coming in. What do they see? Is it, do you come at a certain time? Should you come closer to 3, closer to 6? Do they just sit there in the field? What is it that you observe with the cranes when you're there?
So I think it just really depends on the day. Some days you'll have big flocks just hanging out in front of the tower. It just depends on the day when they're going to be hanging out. If you come a little bit closer to sunset, it's when you're going to see them flying over into the roost to roost in those wetlands on the other side of the tree line.
What and a lot of bird watchers, obviously we're Indiana Audubon, but this is such a neat bird that you see people out there that you might ask, hey, are you a birder? And they say, no, I'm not. It just, they really connect to this bird out there. So the International Crane Foundation is out there, and you guys are obviously talking about Sandhill Crane conservation as well, an important species, a healthy species, but you're also talking about the whooping cranes. And so we can see, was it last year? I had some number, 30 some thousand was like the high point that you guys had last year for Sandhill cranes. How many whooping cranes am I going to find out there?
So it just will kind of depend on the year. We did release 3 chicks from our captive rearing program this last year. We released them last month. So we might see a couple more this year than we did last year. But we can expect to see there's 68 in the there's 69 in the population now. So you can expect to see quite a few up at Jasper-Pulaski, either moving through the area or some will spend the whole winter there.
Yeah, 69, and we got 100,000 sandhills. You're kind of looking, that's a needle in a haystack. But the needle in the haystack sticks out a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Definitely a big white bird, largest bird in North America.
So are you going to confuse it with anything else?
Sometimes people will confuse it, especially flying over. Sometimes people confuse it for a snow geese or a blue heron. But I like to suggest for people when they see them flying over, cranes will always fly with their neck outstretched. And a lot of other birds that people confuse them with, like the blue heron, like egrets, they'll fly with their neck scrunched. So that's one way to tell if you're looking at a crane or if you're looking at something else. Another thing with cranes is they have a really short back toe. So if you ever see a big white bird in a tree, it's definitely not a whooping crane or a sandhill crane because they can't perch in trees.
Gotcha. Okay. Gosh, I've learned bills and I've learned the back toe today. I'm ready for crane trivia.
Yeah.
Why do we see them with the Sandhill cranes at Jasper-Pulaski? Are they associated with them? Because we know that this is introduced population. So what's going on there?
So I wouldn't consider them friends. They're just hanging out in the same space, using the same habitat. Sometimes you will see the whooping cranes, which are typically more territorial than our sandhill cranes. They'll kind of chase the sandhill cranes away from them, do some threat displays, things like that, telling them to back off.
So it's kind of like 2 fat guys at a buffet. We both arrived for the same reason, but we didn't necessarily come together.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Nick, have you seen them on property?
Yeah, I have before. Not this year. But yeah, we actually, I think it was that event where I mentioned it was real cold and snowy. We had one right in front of the crane tower that day for a few hours when Audubon came out to do their event, which was perfect timing. They don't use our property a whole lot. We do usually see at least one here a year for a short amount of time. But they're more frequently at a power plant that's about 10 miles northwest of us. NIPSCO power plant, Schaefer generating station. They have a warm water discharge that it's a big pond that has warm water from the power plant, so it doesn't freeze. And a lot of sandhill cranes use that area, and usually the few whoopers that hang out in the area use that as well. And they'll fly out from that power plant to feed in the ag fields. And that's good. Just north of the town of Wheatfield, if you drive some county roads up there, you probably got a better chance of spotting a whooping crane than you do here at the property.
Gotcha.
And then, like Sam had mentioned, if you are out looking around at cranes off property, make sure you're staying at least 2 football fields away from them, 200 yards. And if you're out there on county roads, make sure you're respecting private property. All that ground's private. You're welcome to stop on the side of the road, but don't be wandering out into people's fields.
It's been fascinating. You said 69, Sam. Over the course of the several years now, decade that we've been reintroducing, there's been so many different ways it's been done, and it kind of transitions and changes. And so you have these birds that have migrated in different ways. So how are they doing it now to support the crane population? Are we still releasing? We used to migrate them with ultralight planes. I don't think that's done anymore, right?
No, not anymore. So we stopped the ultralight flights in 2016, and we stopped it for a good reason, because we had a large enough population that they were able to migrate on their own. We didn't have to continue teaching the new birds the route. The birds that were already there were teaching the younger birds where to go for the winter.
In those early days, there used to be like big events. I remember like in Scatatuck, you would hear that the cranes are coming, and folks would gather to wait to watch them take off on the ultralight. And I was even at Dune State Park working one year, and there was a crane that was being tracked, and I'm not sure what was going on, but there was some really strong north winds, and apparently this crane booked it and like outpaced the pickup truck that had the big antenna on it. And she was trying to track it, and she had lost it and had to wait to get some other source of information for that bird to reacquire it. And I got to see they wear like this costume when they're out in the field.
Yep.
Can you speak to that? Do you have one?
I do have one. I won't put it on for you right now, but I do have one.
You wear it on the tower?
Yeah, I just prance around out there in the field. But yeah, we realized pretty early on with our captive breeding program that cranes imprint really easily on people. And while that makes it really easy to raise them, it makes it really hard to reintroduce them into the wild when they grow up thinking that they're a person, not a crane. And they don't want anything to do with other cranes if they grow up imprinted on people. So that was kind of the beginning of the captive costume rearing program, because while we love our whooping cranes, they're not the smartest bird. So putting a white sheet over your head and having a little fake puppet hands allows us to fake out being a whooping crane. And so they grow up thinking, yes, I'm a whooping crane, and seek that out when they're in the wild.
So you've just said they're big and dumb. No,
Don't put those words in my mouth.
no, but but they're charismatic. We have a connection with them, and
absolutely.
and just looking at those different species we were looking at earlier, and all those different stories. So many cultures have some sort of connection to cranes versus other birds too. So this is worldwide in their ability to do that. And I myself am a big fan of Aldo Leopold, and I've gone up to Baraboo. I've been to the International Crane Foundation, not since they've reopened with the big expansion that they did there. I've been up there, and then of course to see the shack. And I still remember that Aldo wrote, our ability to perceive quality in nature begins as in art with the pretty. And it expands through successive stages of the beautiful to values as yet uncaptured by language. And he goes on to say, the quality of cranes lies, I think, in this higher gamut, as yet beyond the reach of words. And I think as a young Hoosier, for me, being taken out to Jasper-Pulaski on all these Halloween nights, and it was, like I'm 9 years old, looking at these cranes, kind of getting that appreciation, that connection. And I think that's something that a lot of Hoosiers have. And it's just such a unique thing that we're able to have. Looking at that flyway map, looking at these locations like that if you haven't yet, go to the International Crane Foundation as a Hoosier too. It's about 2-3 hours. Get there, go Madison, go north there. Beautiful, lots of good hiking you can do. So you can make a whole day or weekend out of it. And if you go to the International Crane Foundation, will you see cranes, Sam?
Oh, absolutely. You'll see all 15 species.
Whoa,
Only
all
place in the
15.
world.
Not the only Siberian one that goes to Iran, right?
Well, you won't see that one.
And so are they in like natural exhibits?
Yeah, we do have them all in natural exhibits. We do have a pair of Siberian cranes, and I just want to make a note that the oldest crane recorded was a Siberian crane at the International Crane Foundation that lived to be 83 years old. So cranes are pretty long-lived species.
We know in the wild longevities.
So for whooping cranes and our sandhill cranes, they live until they're about mid to late 30s.
That is incredible length of time. If you're looking at, things like Blue Jays are like 17 years max, Cardinals 15. So we're looking at a lot of longevities, a growing population. I kind of think that for folks like Nick, do you just hear sandhill cranes, I guess, in your dreams even as these numbers grow?
I just could literally hear them at any time, pretty much. I have a residence at Jasper-Pulaski, so I hear the birds at work. I hear the birds at home. Yeah, I don't have to dream about it. I can just step out the door and hear them.
It's all the time. So even on your down, yeah. So they're never out of hearing range for you.
Usually not.
I was just thinking about, you were talking about wheat field, the Schaefer, the Nipsco plant that's up there. A lot of birds are growing in wintering numbers down there, like 1,000 plus that we have now. Usually it used to be Goose Pond. You go to Goose Pond to see the tens of thousands in the winter. Now they're there. I'm just curious, maybe you guys don't even know, but like that plant's up for decommissioning, right? Is that going to
Yeah.
disappear? Then will we hypothetically then see them kind of disperse out?
One, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure on if and when they're going to decommission it. That's been, they were supposed to do it this year and it hasn't happened. So I don't know. They keep kicking it around. So I don't know if it will. But like you mentioned, Brad, that that water stays open year round. It doesn't freeze. So we do winter cranes here now in the area. They don't winter at Jasper-Pulaski because our wetlands do freeze, but they will stay at that power plant all winter as long as there's not too much snow cover. They can still get out in the fields, find food. They'll dig through quite a bit of snow, but if it gets bad enough that they can't dig through the snow to get to their food, they will migrate. But yeah, I would venture to guess if and when they close that plant, that those birds will migrate. We won't have birds wintering in Northwest Indiana, or that they won't winter there for sure. And I would think once JP freezes, instead of going to that power plant, they'll have to go south.
I've done a lot of birding around that power plant, and it's really interesting in the winter, the things that are just in that area. A lot of times you can't see some of the ponds that are in the property, but there's just birds around. And the cranes, that's where I've seen whooping cranes myself. I've seen like 2 or 3 just in those surrounding fields nearby. And it's a great spot to see eagles as well. And even on the tower, both bald and golden eagles can be in the area. Have you seen those?
Yeah, we do usually have a couple golden eagles that show up every winter as they're migrating. We have a pair of resident bald eagles. We have a nest on the property, and they've been raising eagles here every year. They raise young. But yeah, in the winter, we have those eagles around, and they use the pasture with the cranes. You get a lot of migratory birds together like that. Ducks and cranes are going to have the eagles around too, looking for a meal. And
Okay.
yeah.
Will the big goldens predate? Will they attack cranes?
I don't think either one of them really attack cranes too much, but if one happens to get injured, or unfortunately we do have power line strikes occasionally in the area, I think they'd be more feeding on cranes that are already dead or injured, not taking a healthy adult sandhill crane.
Hopefully not a whooping crane either up in that area. So I've seen a couple there, but it seems like later in the season, Indiana and Goose Pond specifically seems to be a growing site to see whooping cranes in the wintertime, or at least the number of them. You alluded that there's a site that you can track them or see online roughly where they're at.
Yes. So the International Crane Foundation, on their website, there is the whooper map. So you can just Google Whooper map ICF and pull that up, and it will show you the counties that we've reported seeing birds in, and then also which birds we saw in that county. So we won't report the exact location of the bird just because people want to see whooping cranes, and we don't want a whole bunch of people to flock out to see these birds and spook them and maybe potentially not see them in the area again. So we just report the county, and we ask that other people do the same just to keep those birds and make sure that they're not being overly disturbed by people. But you can see if they're in the area, definitely.
It seemed like in the last year, I had read that like a percentage of the entire population is wintering right here in the Hoosier State.
Yes. So with climate change, with milder winters here in Indiana, especially southern Indiana, we're seeing a lot more birds spend the whole winter here, especially down at Goose Pond. So starting October 30th, I'll be doing weekly whooping crane walks. So if anyone's in the area, come check it out. It'll be every Wednesday at 8 a.m. We'll go around and we'll look for whooping cranes.
Where does that start at?
October 30th. So next
No,
week.
where?
Oh, at Goose Pond.
Oh.
So hopefully we have some in the state by next week, but we'll see.
And if you are tracking for sandhill cranes, you can then go to that Indiana DNR site, the Division of Fish and Wildlife. Jasper-Pulaski has a dedicated just a sandhill crane page where you can learn more about that migration, see photos there. There's a video. You can listen, kind of see some of the dancing that they're doing. And then you get the weekly numbers. And what day do those come out?
We usually do the count on Tuesday. We try to get them posted on Tuesday. Sometimes they don't get posted till Wednesday, depending on what's going on.
Where are we at now? How many?
Just shy of 3,500. I think it was 3,476.
Okay, 3,000.
We've been stuck on 3,000 this year so far. 3,000 holding steady each of the 3 weeks we've counted them.
Yeah, that seems pretty typical until we see that big freeze snap occur.
Yeah, usually it stays around. Yeah. Yep. Builds real slow, and then at the end of November, usually a big jump.
If you are driving around on the rest of the property, what are some of the other things that you might see also this time of year?
Yes, we have a little bit of everything. Some of the stuff that's probably easier to see are some of our resident birds that are here all the time. Wild turkeys are pretty big, stick out like a sore thumb when they're out in the field. We helped out Winnemac Fish and Wildlife Area this week to do their fall bobwhite covey count, which is pretty neat. So if you're here early in the morning, you might hear them bobwhite quail doing their covey call. We've got quite a few quail on the property.
Now, for those that don't see bobwhite often, I know the call. What's a covey call? Is that the bobwhite call or something different?
So no, the bobwhite call they're going to be doing in the spring and summer, looking for a mate. Their fall covey call, they describe it as a coily. So that's kind of instead of the bobwhite, it's coily would be the way you're saying it. But it's the birds in the morning, they're waking. Oh.
That call?
I didn't hear it, Brad. Still not coming through.
I think that's it. I went to Sibley, I looked at call and says, that must be the covey call. I don't know that call. I haven't heard it.
It's pretty neat. You got to be up early to catch it, though, usually before sunrise. Right at first light, them birds are kind of gathering together, getting the covey together before daybreak, and they're calling back and forth to each other.
Cool. So it looks like a lot of good roads you can drive around within the Jasper-Pulaski area, in addition to viewing the crane tower that's behind me.
Yeah, we have county roads that crisscross the property. A lot of oak savanna habitat. The wetland habitat's kind of off limits, like I'd mentioned. That waterfowl resting area. Try to keep most folks out of there so the cranes can roost undisturbed. But yeah, you're more than welcome to drive the roads. We do have mowed lanes and disc fire lanes that we maintain. We don't have designated hiking trails like a state park. You can get out on the property and walk. We just like to make people aware that the property is shared with hunters and stuff as well. So there are going to be other people in the woods. So just be cognizant of that. And yeah. Yep.
Great. And if they're coming by the office, where you guys are located, do they have office hours there? Is it open on the weekends?
Yeah, our office is open generally Monday to Friday. We run on Eastern time, so that's 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. And now that duck season's open, we're doing waterfowl draws. We will have somebody in the check station from 4:30 a.m. till noon on weekends for the rest of the fall.
Now, did I hear that you guys is there some sort of plan or dream you guys can expand and do some more like interpretive stories and a larger visitor center? Did I hear something maybe?
Yeah, we're actually in the works of designing a new office and visitor center. If anybody on the call has been to Goose Pond, it's going to be hopefully real similar to that. We're going to build it just south of the parking lot there at the Crane Tower, so you'll be able to view cranes from our new office and visitor center. But yeah, the design portion of the project's funded. We're moving forward with that, and if everything goes according to the engineer's plans, we have a move-in date right now of September of 2027. So hopefully 3 years we could be doing this from our new visitor center.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty sweet. Just look out
It's
the window
exciting.
and just watch, and that'd be really neat. So yeah, because such a amazing bird story. We got a bucket list item. And so if you have not gone to see the cranes at Jasper-Pulaski and then later in the winter down at Goose Pond, it's definitely a bucket list item for all Hoosiers because we looked at 1,000,000 birds. You're like, well, 100,000. That's not a lot. Till you see 100,000, this eastern population that migrates through here that we have, and they're the biggest cranes. And when you get numbers like November 28th last year, 32,938, I found it here. That's a third of the population. And if that doesn't show you the importance of a site like Jasper-Pulaski as an important bird area, not only just a phenomenal site to witness, to see this migration occurring and with a chance to see a federally endangered whooping crane in the process. If you haven't been there yet, why the heck haven't you, really? Are you really a birder? And so you got to get there. And I'm going to recommend, if you want to, of course, we know Sam's there all the time. The DNR staff's there on any of these given nights because the cranes, it's not like Thursday night football. You got to pick the night to see it. They're there every night right now through migration, and Indiana Audubon is hosting an open house as well for members and birders. And so we'll have our own staff there. Sam will be there as well. Nick's going to be out. We have Matt Gillespie from the Chicago Bird Alliance was there. And so we'll also do a Facebook live stream. So if you can't make it there, you can still at least witness the migration on that night. And we're bringing something that night that we don't always bring, and hot cocoa. And so we're talking about weather and bundling up. So we'll have treats and stuff to hand out if you make it out there that night. You can register on our site. It's free to go. And we're handing out, there's been kind of a campaign. I don't know what'll happen. There's a lot of support for cardinals. Everybody wants the crane to be the new state bird, right? Change it. Since the cardinal has 7 states, I think there's going to be a little granny alliance that might push that away from us for the cardinal. But we have these really cool Indiana Audubon crane stickers that we'll have out at the event on November 23rd. So we'll be handing out Sandhill Crane stickers to everybody. So that's just the day to come. It's right near the peak. If you want to, it'll probably snow, but go ahead, plan it, put it on your calendar, and join us for our Sandhill Crane open house. And that'll be the day before our next Hoosier Birders Hour on Friday, November 22nd. And we'll talk more about next month's topic here later in the month as we get that. But I see we're at the end of the hour. I want to thank Sam from the International Crane Foundation and Nick from the Jasper-Pulaski Fish Wildlife Area for talking cranes. It's such a cool bird, something that we all connect with, and I learned some new things about them today. And hopefully we will see all you guys here at Jasper-Pulaski in the next couple of weeks. So with that, it is our end of our hour, and thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next month. Thanks everyone. Thanks Nick. Thanks Sam.
Thank you guys.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me.